Good morning. When I took the job at Overland High School this year, they had said, you're teaching AP Government and World History, and I went, great. I've taught them both before. This is going to be fine, fantastic, no problem. And then I had a group of World History students that were all freshmen, and I remembered I hadn't taught freshmen since my first year of teaching. And then I remembered that they're also freshmen. And so for me, this was going to be a new experience. Yes, I taught world history. Yes, I'd done it before, and I'd always done it exactly the way that I was expecting to do it, which was we start at the beginning of time and get as far as we can during the school year and trying to engage them in the process. Okay? And that's what I was attempting to do this year with my group of freshmen. And I did a fairly successful job first semester, and we got from the beginning of time until about ancient Greece, which was pretty good, I thought, in about 18 weeks. And so then we got to this point at the end of the semester, and we had this common prompt that we had come up with. And we had this amazing teacher, and she came up with this prompt, and it was very similar to CSAP, but it basically asked the students to defend whether or not world history should stay in the curriculum. I went, okay, and they had to use examples from class and things like that. And most of my students said yes. I won't say all because I'm not a miracle worker. But most of them said, yeah, absolutely, we should keep world history in the curriculum. And then they were supposed to give me reasons why they were supposed to keep world history in the curriculum or why they should get rid of it. And what I found is that even though the students had done every single thing that I asked, they really thought about it, and they'd said, we learned this, and this was really neat, and we thought this was important. I got to this point when I realized that not a single one of them actually connected with what was going on. They really just kind of said, okay, I know the facts, and I have them, and I know them for your class, and at the end of your class, that's great, and that's wonderful, and I'll probably forget about 90% of it, would be my guess. And so what I decided to do when this semester started was I said, you know, I need to do something different. I need to get them more engaged in what's going on, beyond just kind of this, you know, tell me what's happening, what do you see, all of these types of things. And so then finally I said, okay, you know what? I've heard about teaching history thematically. I've never actually seen it, and I certainly hadn't ever thought about how to do it. And so I said, you know, chronologically made sense. And I can't get rid of chronologically in my head because I am a history teacher and things go in order for me. But what I decided I needed to do was I needed to find a way to engage the students more in what we were talking about. And so what I'd done is I picked these themes that I'd seen, and we were going to go back to basically ancient Rome anyway. So I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to pick 3 things that happened through all of history. And so the first theme I picked was imperialism, because the concept of imperialism has gone back kind of through time. And ancient Rome is a great example of imperialism, so I said, hey, this is fantastic, this is wonderful, but they still really don't care about ancient Rome. So how am I going to get them to care about the things that I'm teaching them about? And so finally I said, you know what? Why don't I start now and work backwards? Still chronological, still made sense to me. So I said, okay, I'm going to start with imperialism, and I'm going to work my way backwards. So I gave them a goal. I said, this is your goal. This is what you guys are going to do. And this is actually pasted into all of their notebooks if you want. It's bright yellow. It sits on all their notebooks in my classroom right now. So they had a goal. This is what you guys are going to be able to do. These are your essential questions. How has diversity impacted the concepts of change over time? It's in the brand new standards, and it seemed to fit really well with this kind of idea. And then I went into the inquiry questions. Does it still exist? If it still exists, how does it still exist? If it doesn't, why doesn't it exist? Why is it practiced, or why was it practiced in history? What were the consequences, and were there any advantages to it? So instead of me telling them, this is what happened in imperialism, and this is what imperialism was, it became them asking these inquiry questions. And I gave them an outline. I said, okay, we're going to start with current events. And I couldn't have planned this better if I tried. Because we had started with current events, and what's the very first thing that showed up? Tunisia. And I went, hey, that's a great current event to talk about with this whole idea of globalization and social media and all of these things. And then our next unit that we just barely started about a week and a half ago was the spread of democracy. And what's going on? Egypt. Yay. I was like, this is like the greatest thing ever, because it's on the news all the time, and they're updating their phones. It's like, if I could have planned the world to work out with my lessons, I probably couldn't have planned it any better. So right now, they're in the process of studying the spread of democracy kind of through history and imperialism, and whether or not it should spread. That's their big question. That's what they're going to answer at the end of this whole thing, as far as that. Should democracy spread? Okay? And so I said, okay, we need some key terms, because frankly, There's some big words in there, a lot of syllables, things that they've never heard before. Because even though they've probably taken world history, they've probably taken geography, for them, they're just vocabulary words. They're not words that they've ever actually used in a sentence or in a conversation with their parents. So I said, okay, these are the key terms that we need to have, and then they have a project at the end, and this whole thing is up on the wiki. Taylor was nice enough to put it up, so if you want it, feel free, it's up there. And I said, okay, and so I showed them this inquiry method, and I said, okay, we're going to connect, and we're going to wonder, and we're going to investigate, and at the bottom that you can't see is the word construct, and you're going to express, and you're going to reflect, and it all goes in a big, huge circle, and somehow, some way, you guys are not only going to know this stuff, but you're going to want to learn more about it. And that was my goal. How do I get you to want to learn more about it? So the very first thing that I did is the Uncle Sam cartoon, and you guys have probably seen it. I don't know if you can click on it real quick, Taylor, the link. And this is something that Peggy O'Neill Jones and I had put together for a presentation for NCSS on a Prezi, but this thing's been around for a while with all the stuff with teaching with primary sources. And it will pull up, but it's the Uncle Sam cartoon, and when it pulls up, you'll recognize it. But this particular cartoon, when I chose this cartoon, I said, you know what? I've always taught this to teach American imperialism. Okay, it's Uncle Sam, it makes sense. We teach it with the Spanish-American War, makes sense. Okay? But what my kids didn't know was what imperialism was. Not a single one of them could tell me what it was. They had no idea. So I gave them the cartoon, and I said, what do you see? I didn't tell them anything about when it was made. I didn't tell them anything about when it was published, or what it was about, or anything else. I gave them the unit plan, told them what we were going to do, and where they were going to get to, and I said, what do you see? And they started telling me, this is what I see. I see this, I see this, I see this, I see this. I said, great, what questions do you have? Start writing them down. What questions do you have about what's going on? And so they started asking questions. Well, what about the kid in the back? Well, what are the kids in the front? Why don't they have shoes on? And I personally I'd seen that they didn't have shoes on, but I hadn't paid very close attention to it. But they asked, why isn't that there? Okay, why are there kids in the back? What about the kid in the back that's not white? Who's the kid in the door? They really didn't know any of these things. And it's not that they hadn't been taught them at some point, it's that they hadn't connected it to anything else. And so this cartoon, if you break down the Prezi, it basically goes through and it breaks it down pretty much picture by picture. And this probably took us, I'd say, a good 90 minutes in class to actually go through picture by picture. What are these things? What do you see? Why are they there? At the end of it, every single one of my students had a definition of what imperialism was. I didn't give them a definition of what imperialism was. I still, to this day, have not given them a definition of imperialism. But if you walk into my classroom, all 25 world history students that are in there, and they just left for lunch, will be able to tell you, this is what imperialism is. And so I said, you know, for the first time, it wasn't just me giving them the information, and even when I asked them inquiry questions before, it was nothing like this. So, you want to go back to the PowerPoint? And so then what I ended up with, after we kind of went through this, what is imperialism, I started with actual current events. And I found this fantastic article called The Globalization of Mcdonaldization, which for them was like, hey, I know what McDonald's is. And they knew something, and it connected immediately with them. They said, hey, I know what McDonald's is, and then they read the article. The article talks all about how McDonald's has gone global, but all of these different things are going on, and that they're serving, rice burgers in Japan and China, and why aren't they serving hamburgers in India, and all of these types of things. And they started asking questions about it. They're like, well, why is that? I said, well, why do you think? And eventually they started actually having conversations. It was amazing. This is so much planning work ahead of time, and I do almost nothing in class anymore. It's great. I plan forever to try and figure this out, and I have to do almost nothing in class because they do it all. And I do have to guide them, and I have to facilitate them, and I have to ask them the questions, but in reality, they do it all. When I say, is globalization the same thing as imperialism? They already had a definition of what imperialism was. They were starting to understand what globalization was, so then it became, okay, well then are they the same thing? And they could say yes, and they can say no, and either one was fine as long as they could defend their answer. I was okay with it. And then we got into the spread of democracy. Should it spread? And they went through, and I said, okay, pick countries, guys. And they did. Those are the countries they picked. I certainly didn't pick them. Okay, they picked all of those countries. And I said, okay, sure, cool. We'll take a look at the spread of democracy through those countries. And so we started with France, and I said, great, let's take a look at the French Revolution. And so I showed them a little clip on the French Revolution, a nice little video that had the French Revolution on it. I said, this is great, no problem. And they looked at it and they said, okay, well, these are the causes of the French Revolution. I said, okay, no problem. You see the cause of the French Revolution. Why did that cause them to revolt? And they kind of looked at me and went, we have no idea. And so I said, okay, well, would it make you be a little upset what had happened? And they said, well, yeah, we'd be upset if that happened to us. I said, well, what would you do about it? They started listing all of these things that they would do about it. Well, we'd go talk to our congressman, or we would talk to our parents, or we'd call the newspapers, or we'd do all these things. I said, well, what if you couldn't do that? Then what would you do? They said, well, what do you mean you can't do that? And I said, well, what if you weren't free to do that? And so suddenly we got into this discussion about what democracy actually is. And they had a definition of democracy by the time we were done. It wasn't my definition, it was their definition of it. But for them, suddenly it made a connection to what was going on. And for me, I am the biggest technology nerd I know when it comes to, I really want to use all of the cool little toys in technology because it keeps me engaged, because my attention span is slightly shorter than my 9th graders. And so if I'm bored, I know they're bored. And so I was going, okay, well, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to use this to actually engage them in what's going on? And so I had decided that I needed to use technology as my tool. I couldn't use technology to teach them because there's just too much information out there. There's too much. If I ask them to go Google something, I don't want to know what they're going to come back with, but I'm fairly certain they're all going to come back with the exact same Wikipedia definition, which is fine if that's what I want them to do, but it wasn't. I didn't want them to just come up with a definition of it. I wanted them to go beyond that. So I said, okay, I need to use technology as my tool to engage them, to enhance their learning, to get their buy-in, to get them to buy into what we were doing and what was going on. And suddenly, I now have this group of 9th graders that comes in and they're like, hey, I saw on the news, and then they start talking about what they saw on the news with Egypt. And they're like, I don't understand. And we were talking about a democracy, and we said they have to have free and fair elections, and then I look in here and this guy says he's gonna step down, and then he doesn't. And they came after school yesterday, by the way, because they saw that he was gonna step down. They came after school to ask me about all of this. And all I could think was, it's 3 o'clock, what are you still doing here? You're never here at 3 o'clock. It is 2:45, and I can catch you in the hallways, that's fine. But there's no way that you're gonna be in my office or in my classroom asking me about why that's suddenly happening and how did that work, but they're not really a democracy, and are they really gonna get to be a democracy? And I said, I don't know, I guess we're gonna have to find out, and we're gonna have to talk about it when I get back on Tuesday. And they went, but by Tuesday, other stuff will have happened. And I realized that I suddenly have this group of 14, 15-year-old students that their learning doesn't stop after the 90 minutes that I have them every other day. Their learning suddenly continues on for the next 3 or 4 days until they can come back and ask more questions. I don't have to come up with very many questions anymore. They come up with them. And this has only been going on for about 4 or 5 weeks now, that they've actually been doing it this way. And I'm still growing chronologically, won't lie. I still have to have a timeline. I still think it's important that they understand cause and effect. This caused this to happen. I still think that that is a really important thing, and we're still doing that. We're just looking at the thing that happened and then going to what caused that to happen. Instead, this is what happened, why did that happen? And so the big thing for me as I go through this kind of process with them, and I won't lie, there are some things that I have not gone so well in this whole process, and some things I go, oh, that was a really bad idea. I definitely need to fix that next time. But there are a lot of times that I realize that I know where I want my students to go. My students know where I need them to go because I've told them, this is where you're going. So as long as I know that, it doesn't matter how many side streets I take to get there, eventually they're gonna get there because they know what they need and I know what they need to get out of this whole process using all these primary sources and using all the inquiry and everything else. And suddenly I'm not doing the teaching, but they're doing the learning. And that's become kind of my way of going around, how do I get them to go beyond their 90 minutes in the classroom with me? So, and I think I'm out of time, so that's it. Thank you.